Good evening. In honor of our men and women who wear the uniform of this country and defend us every day, it is our tradition here to ask you to stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Be seated. It's been a patriotic day here at the Reagan Library. This morning we had 1,000 students and 3 Presidential Medal of Honor recipients here. It is rare to ever see one, but to have 3 on our stage truly was a privilege. And I hope that any of you that ever want to come and participate in that event, we do it at least once a year. You can find it on our website. I highly encourage it. It was really quite something. So I want to welcome you to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. For you, those of you that I do not know or haven't met, my name is Joanne Drake. I am in my 31st year, I figured out, serving Ronald and Nancy Reagan. I served them at the White House. It was very much a privilege, post-presidency, and now I'm at the foundation as the Chief Administrative Officer. Before we get too much into our program, I want to offer a special welcome to the spouses of our speakers tonight. Joellen Frost is here. And there she is, and Jean Marie Davis right here. Thank you. We are honored this evening to have not one, but 2 former members of Congress with us as guest speakers. Together, they represent 40 years of service in the United States House of Representatives. They were 2 of only 435 men and women who speak on behalf of over 316 million Americans on a daily basis. One is a Democrat, the other a Republican. They both reached leadership positions within their party, having served as chair of their party's congressional campaign committees. And I think they may have been in direct competition. No, I thought maybe there was one election cycle. From 1994 to 2008, Tom Davis represented a district in Northern Virginia just outside of our nation's capital. He served as House GOP campaign chairman for 2 cycles and chairman of the House Committee on Government Reform and Oversight before retiring, undefeated, in 2008. He's a graduate of Amherst College and the University of Virginia Law School. He is currently the Director of Government Relations at Deloitte, and in his spare time, serves as the Rector for the Board of Visitors for George Mason University. Not surprisingly, he is a co-founder of an organization called No Labels, whose mission is to, quote, help move America from the old politics of point scoring toward a new politics of problem solving. Our second speaker this evening is Martin Frost, and although I understand he was born in Southern California, he served 26 years in Congress representing the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas. He was long considered one of his party's top strategists. He served 4 years as chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and 4 years as chair of the House Democratic Caucus. When Mr. Frost departed Congress in January 2005, he was the senior Southern Democrat in the House and the dean of the Texas Congressional Delegation. Mr. Frost is now a senior partner in a Washington law firm, and in his spare time, he has served as a fellow at the Institute of Politics at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and was named a public policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. In the 2008 general election, he served as president of America Votes, a nationwide voter turnout organization, which many of you may have remembered. Tonight, though, we are going to hear how these gentlemen believe we can solve the partisan divide that has both slowed legislation and the general proceedings of government to the point of standstill. They call their new book Partisan Divide, and it was written as a roadmap to fix a broken system. They believe that members of different parties, as they are, can work together, share lessons that they've learned on how to govern, and offer solutions, starting with a little common sense and some out-of-the-box thinking. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'd agree with me that we need some fair play and decency back in our Congress and in Washington in general. Please help me to welcome the Honorable Tom Davis and the Honorable Martin Frost to find out how that can be achieved.
Well, I'm going to go first for about 10 minutes. I have a little slideshow that makes it a little, I have a slideshow that makes it a little easier to understand. And I'll be on 10 minutes, Martin will be 10 minutes, and we want to make this as interactive as we can with questions from all of you. So Martin and I did a lot of TV together. They'd have a Democrat and Republican, and we started comparing notes about what's going wrong with the system. We'd like to go back where the Gipper and Tip O'Neill could sit down and work out some of the tough problems. And we said, what has emerged, what has happened over the last 20, 30 years that this is no longer happening? And we started to look at some of the macro factors that have emerged during that time, and then we came up with some observations about how it might be fixed. So this is the state of politics in America today. I did this presentation yesterday. So that's the map of the United States in by county in terms of red and blue counties in the 2012 election, just to give you an idea. You notice the Republicans are a little thin along both coasts. So the three macro factors Martin and I identified, we discussed them at length in the book, and I'm going to go through them very briefly here, are one, you have the emergence of what we call single-party districts. We've always had them. But today in the House, about 80% of the congressional districts are pre-drawn to elect one party or the other. The general election is nothing but a constitutional formality that the members have to go through. The primary is determining. So what has happened is that members have basically put all of their attention, their voting records, their rhetoric toward their primary voters, because that's who elects them. As I said, there just aren't enough of the other party to elect them in these districts. And primary voters are a pretty thin ideological slice of the electorate, and they generally don't reward compromise. They like their members to stand tough and to stand on principle, and that has had the effect of their behavior in Congress, or as the late B.O. Key, the political scientist, said, party in power, of just moving the parties apart, creating this partisan divide. Now, on the redistricting, it's obviously gerrymandering is a huge culprit. Residential sorting patterns, where people who think alike now live alike. You could see that on the map there, is another culprit, and that's always been there. And then the Voting Rights Act, which in the South now, the way has been utilized in the South. In the Deep South states, all you have are white Republicans and black Democrats, with no need to talk to the other party, because the Voting Rights Act mandates that you can't discriminate against minorities in drawing the lines. So the end result is, when you're packing minorities, who are you packing? Democrats. And it bleaches the districts around. Martin and I have different perspectives on that, but the outcome is that's clearly an outcome. If it were just redistricting, this would be easily solvable. But that's not the only issue. Two other macro factors have emerged just over the last 20 years that Martin and I have identified. One is the media business models today are polarization models. They cater to certain constituencies. They feed them every day. It's talk radio, it's cable news, and the internet. The internet, there are no filters on the internet. So these websites, to attract people, they're not objective news sources. You walk into the Republican cloakroom, the House Republican cloakroom, it's the Drudge Report is on. You go over to the Democratic cloakroom, and they have Huffington Post. And people receive the news they want to hear. They don't even deal from the same facts. It was hard enough in the old days when we had the same facts to try to reach an agreement. Now think how difficult it is today when everybody's got different facts. These folks, this is not news. These are business models. They're successful business models. They work, and they thrive on polarization. We had one member from my state had announced he was going to vote to reopen the government until he was put up on Fox News as one of 18 traitors. And his phone just lit up like a Christmas tree at his primary voters, and he had to walk the statement back. This has a cause and effect on members, who Martin and I could fill you with dozens of anecdotes as to how this affects members' behaviors as well. But that's not all. The third thing is the money in politics today. There was an attempt to change it with McCain-Feingold. This was campaign finance reform, by taking this soft money out of politics, from taking it away from the political parties and prohibiting the parties from raising the money. Both Martin and I voted against it, and we said at the time, where do you think this money's going to go? Do you think this money's just going to disappear because you can't give it to the parties? It's going to have some unintended consequences. And in point of fact, what has happened, not just because of McCain-Feingold, but also the Citizens United Court decision, the money has moved away from the parties, which have been a centering force in American politics for 200 years, out to the wings. And it funds a lot of ideological groups and PACs and 501c4s, much of this unreported money. We call it dark money, but money that doesn't have to be reported. It's not transparent. At least when it was with the parties, it was transparent. But this money is now out in the wings that plays in these primary races. Has had a chilling effects on members' behavior. Now, let me just move through a few slides very quickly. These are some of the congressional. We talk about gerrymandering. This is the 12th district in North Carolina. That's a voting rights district. Maryland's 3rd district. That's a congressional district. I mean, Picasso would be proud today to see what Congress has done. This is the earmuff district. This is a voting rights Hispanic district in Chicago that bridges two Hispanic sections of Chicago. Maryland's 2nd district. This is another congressional district, part of a Democratic gerrymander in Maryland. This is a Republican gerrymander in Pennsylvania. This is looks like one dog kicking another dog in the chest, near as I can tell. That, believe it or not, is a congressional district designed to elect a Republican, putting the right suburban constituencies together and packing Democrats. In 2012, Democrats got a majority of the congressional vote, of the House vote in Pennsylvania, as they did nationwide. But the lineup, the House lineup in Pennsylvania was 12-5 Republican. So they did a pretty good job. Again, Picasso would be proud of this too. Voting behavior today is the old adage, all politics is local. We have a chapter in the book, All Politics is No Longer Local. In legislative elections, it is national. And I just go to this, you look at the Senate races last year, the districts on the top were Democratic held seats. Look, where Romney ran well, Republicans picked up. Mark Warner, everyone was shocked at how close the race was in Virginia. It goes right with pattern. He survived. He was exceptionally strong. He survived, but just barely. And then seats underneath him were going Democratic. The bottom line is people come out and they are voting almost like a parliamentary system. Problem is we're not a parliamentary system. We're a balance of power system. But it means when members get to Congress, they behave like it's a parliamentary system, which means we're no longer the minority party, we're the opposition party. And it's just no to everything. That's their role, is just to be no on everything. We can have a lengthy discussion on this later. So National Journal, I'll end with this. National Journal every year ranks members of Congress, conservative, liberal. And what they have done in past years is they have rated how many members vote between the most liberal Republican and the most conservative Democrat. And that's a very broad definition of moderates. In 1982 in the House, 344 out of 435 members were broadly defined moderates, voted between, I think Bill Green was probably the most liberal Republican in those days, and you had a lot of Southern Democratic conservatives. That was 1982. By 1994, it was down to 252. 2002, it was 137. 2014, it's 3. And by the way, 2 of them retired and 1 was defeated in the last election of the 3 Democrats that are over. In the Senate in 1982, it was 58 senators. By 1994, 34 senators. 2002, it was 7. In 2014, 0. It's been that way the last 3 Congresses. We call this the ideological sorting of the parties. There are no longer, at least in behavior, privately you have a lot of good moderate members, but they can't act that way because the political rewards aren't there to do that if they want to get reelected, and frankly most of them do. And so the parties are, we say, ideologically sorted today, and that's the state of play. And I just ask you, finally, we have in the book a chart showing at the Electoral College the Democrats have an advantage. 18 states plus the district have now voted Democrat 6 straight times. We call these the blue wall. 242 electoral votes. Republicans have a red wall of 13 states, 6 straight times Republican for president. Only 102 electoral votes. The Republicans have an institutional advantage in the House. As I said, Democrats got 1.4 million more votes in 2012 for the House of Representatives than Republicans, but Republicans have a 17-seat lead. So it is a Republican advantage in the House. It is a slight Democratic advantage in the presidency. These are not insurmountable, but they are distinct advantages when you go into counting the votes. That's the map we showed earlier. To show those parliamentary voting patterns in those blue wall states, the Senate lineup is 32 to 4 when you go back. 32 to 4. And in it's 25 to 1, the Republicans are the 1 Democrat in these red wall states. Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, probably going to run for governor instead of re-election Senate, won by less than 1%. In these states, 3 of the 4 Republicans are up next time. They got elected in their largest Republican off year since 1938, and they will be at risk the next time around. So these, we are basically a parliamentary system in terms of voter behavior today, with less ticket splitting than at any time in the last 100 years. And Martin, I will then turn it over to you. Thanks. Yeah.
Oh, either that or the map. Either one. Either one's fine. The map's fine. Map's fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you. Tom, most of the charts in the book are Tom's charts. He loves charts. I think they're very interesting. They tell a story. I want to kind of talk without charts up on the wall and just kind of walk you through a lot of what's happened. First of all, it was mentioned in the introduction that I was born in California. I was born in Glendale. My dad worked for Lockheed Burbank during World War II, and he was a graduate of the University of Texas School of Engineering. My folks met at the University of Texas. And as we often say about people who are born somewhere else, I got to Texas as quickly as I could. I was about 4 years old when my parents moved back to Texas after the war. Starting with the pledge is not something that's foreign to me. Now, I don't know how it is for people from a lot of other parts of the country. We start every public function in Texas with the pledge, and have for as long as I've been in public life. And I think it's something very appropriate and something that I appreciate the service of the men and women who have sacrificed for our country. Let me kind of put a fine point on some of the things that Tom's talked about. When Tom talks about a parliamentary system, let's be clear what we're talking about. In many European countries, and in fact countries in other places too, you have either 2 parties or you have multiple parties, and whoever gets a majority of the votes for parliament, or either as a one party or as a coalition, also gets the prime minister, also gets the executive branch. So you have unified government in a parliamentary system. Now, in the United States, we don't have that. We vote separately for president and separately for Congress, many times where we have a president of one party, Congress of another party. But in a parliamentary system, people are expected to vote for their party, and they often do, usually do. In our system, for many years, we didn't vote party once we got elected. We looked at the issues, tried to decide what was in the best interest of the country, often crossed party lines. That doesn't happen anymore. Happens almost never in the Congress. What's caused all this? One of the things that Tom talked about was the way congressional districts are drawn and the way people live together. By having safe Democratic, we're talking the House now, safe Democratic districts or safe Republican districts, people are only concerned about the primary, not concerned about the general election. What does that mean? It means that 80% of the members of the House routinely get reelected, sometimes even more than that, but they have very safe districts, and they're concerned about someone running from the extreme in their own party against them. In the Republican Party, someone from the far right, the Democratic Party, someone from the far left. So how does that influence their behavior? It doesn't mean that they actually lose a primary. Very few people lose primaries to challengers, but members modify their behavior. They modify their voting records to head off a challenge in their own party. And what that means is there's no incentive to cooperate with the other side to meet in the middle. I'll give you a very specific example involving the state of Kansas in this last election. A friend of mine, Pat Roberts, a Republican, I served with in the House. He later was elected to the Senate. Pat had a very tough race against a Tea Party opponent. Now, the opponent wasn't very tough, wasn't much to speak of, but the Tea Party was very strong in his state. And so for 2 years, Pat Roberts moved way far to the right, unlike a number of people from his state over the years who actually had been fairly moderate and had tried to work across party lines. He moved all the way to the right, didn't want to suggest that he would even speak to a Democrat on any issue because he had to head off a primary challenge. He was successful, he was renominated, and then reelected. That happens a lot. And even if people don't actually face an opponent in the primary, they are concerned that they might face an opponent in the primary, particularly with campaign finance the way it is now. Some outside organization can come spend $1 million, $2 million, $3 million in a congressional race in a single district. If they're unhappy, if they think the person is too moderate, either a Democrat or a Republican, and they think that person isn't tough enough and doesn't adhere to the party line enough, and so that person could have a very serious race because of all this outside money coming in. So what do we propose? Tom and I have made a number of suggestions about how the system could be better. First, we suggest that the country look seriously at what has been done here in California on redistricting. You now have a commission that draws the lines. You also have a system where the top two finish in the first round, run against each other. You could be two Republicans or two Democrats. It doesn't have to be a Democrat or a Republican. And what it means is, let's say, for example, two Democrats finish 1 and 2 in a congressional race. They have to talk to the other side. They have to talk to the Republicans. Because in order to win the general election, they've got to get some Republican support. And the same thing on the Republican side. If you have two Republicans who make it into the general election, they have to talk to Democrats in their district. So this is an experiment. Some people don't like what you do in California. Tom and I both think this is something the country ought to look at and learn some lessons from the experience here. And perhaps this is the best way to handle congressional elections. There are a few other states that do nonpartisan or bipartisan commissions. Iowa has done that for some time, Arizona, the state of Washington, and New Jersey. And we have suggested that Congress should pass a national piece of legislation, which it's empowered to do. It was permitted to do this if it wants to, requiring states to establish nonpartisan or bipartisan commissions to draw congressional districts. And perhaps also some standards of what those districts should look like. Compact, not strange looking, not like the ones that he showed you on the board. And maybe, just maybe, we would get some more rational districts and have people elected from those districts who can talk to and work with the other side. We make another recommendation. Tom outlined what had been done with campaign finance. McCain-Feingold took money away from the political parties. When I was chairman of the DCCC, I was chairman before McCain-Feingold passed. If we raised any soft money from a corporation or from a labor union or from a wealthy individual, we had to report every dollar of that to the Federal Election Commission. People could look and see who was giving to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Now, many of these groups, groups that are called C4s, they're established under the charitable IRS, don't have to report their contributors at all to the Federal Election Commission. They do have to file something called a Schedule B to the IRS once a year, but the IRS is not required to make that public. So we don't know who's giving to some of these groups. Now, some of them, the people who put them together, beat their chests and they want to tell you how, all the money they're raising. So we do know some of the money going to these groups, but we don't know all of it. And sometimes it can be very, very significant in a particular election, either for the House or the Senate. We also recommend an unusual thing, again, which Congress could do if it chose to, and that is to have a uniform national primary day, so that all the primaries for the House and Senate, not for president, the states could still have their presidential primaries whenever they wanted to, but the primaries for the House and the Senate would all be on the same day in the country, so that that would be to encourage turnout. Right now, many primaries are low turnout, and that gives extra power to a well-organized minority within a particular party in that district. So the higher the turnout, we think you'd have perhaps you would have more people who'd be elected who'd be willing to talk to the other side. No guarantee on that. Now, in campaign finance, again, let me back up for a minute because I wasn't clear on one point. The Supreme Court, in a series of decisions, not just Citizens United, but in a series of decisions, has held that money equals speech, and that Congress cannot pass laws that restrict anyone's ability to write a check to an organization, to a political organization. Now, you can restrict how much an individual can write to an individual campaign, to campaign of a particular candidate for Congress, but there are no restrictions on how much money people can give to these outside groups. And so, because of the Supreme Court, the only way you could change that system would be, as I suggested a little bit earlier, which is to require that all the money, whenever any corporation, labor union, or wealthy individual writes a check to an organization that mentions a federal candidate in any of their advertising, that all that has to be disclosed. So that's another possibility. We have discussed. We've also presented some other ideas. One of which is a little controversial. I don't know how many people still read newspapers. A lot of people get their news online these days. But Tom and I wrote an op-ed for the Los Angeles Times that was run on Monday, and it talked about the question of earmarks. Now, this is a technical question. For a long time, congressmen could specify particular projects in appropriation bills for their districts. Congress decided in its infinite wisdom that that was a bad idea and that we should take that power away from Congress, not let people earmark money for particular programs, and so Congress has done that, both in the House and the Senate. What was the value of being able to earmark money for a project? Tom had a project in his district, the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, badly needing to be repaired, that linked the suburbs between his district in Virginia and the suburbs in Maryland, a bridge with a lot of traffic. Any of you who spent any time in D.C., Tom got an earmark to get that bridge repaired. The business community in Dallas, in my district, came to me years ago and said, Dallas wants to be a great city. We think we're a great city. We're one of the largest cities in the country that doesn't have mass transit, and asked me if I would carry their program to have an above-ground light rail system for the city of Dallas, which I did, and in an earmark, and we now have a very fine light rail system in my city. Now, earmarks don't increase the amount of money appropriated. This is a zero-sum game. What it means, though, is that some of the money that's appropriated, and usually is only 1 or 2% of the money that's voted for a particular department or agency, some of that can be directed to a particular program in a particular member's district. Now, some of this system was abused in the past. There was a congressman from San Diego, some of you may remember, Randy Duke Cunningham, who was, I'm a graduate of the University of Missouri. He was in my class at the University of Missouri, graduated the same year. I didn't know him in college. He sold earmarks. He actually took bribes to earmark particular defense projects. That clearly is illegal, should be illegal. We're not suggesting anything like that should go on. We're also suggesting that if a member earmarks an appropriation for his district, that his name be attached to it. No more secret funding for things. Just put your name in the committee report, say Congressman Frost requested this funding for this project. And that any earmarking be limited to a member's district or to a senator to his home state. You can't earmark money in another part of the country to serve someone who's may have contributed to your campaign. We also have some other suggestions. We are optimists. We both believe that our system can be much better, and that if we will take some time to try and improve it, and if citizens will take an interest in this and demand that Congress make some institutional changes and start so that members will start talking to each other again. It is a terrible situation. We talk about in the book about when Congress was, we call it when Congress was fun, but it's really when Congress was constructive, when you could get things done. Tom has some very good examples. Tom was chairman of the Government Reform Committee, and he chaired the hearings on the steroid use in baseball. He had the cooperation of Henry Waxman from Los Angeles, top-ranking Democrat on that committee, and they worked on a bipartisan basis. That couldn't have been done, and people poked fun at Tom when he first started doing this. Why are you doing this? Why are you spending congressional time looking at steroid use? Well, it turned out that he and Henry were right, that it was widespread, and it was wrong, and it sent the wrong message for young people in this country. So they were able to do that on a bipartisan basis. We took the tour of the museum, of the library a little while ago. It's a big slab of the Berlin Wall. I was in Congress at the time the Berlin Wall opened. My family on both sides was from Eastern and Central Europe. My father's family, several generations back, was from Berlin. My mother's family was from Lithuania. I had a strong interest in that part of the world. And so I went over, I was on the first congressional delegation to go to Berlin after the wall opened. And I talked to the East Berliners, and members of Congress are always saying, how can we help? And they said, well, you can help us because we haven't had a democratically run country since way before World War II, and we need some instruction on how you run a democracy. And so I came back, talked to the speaker at that time, Tom Foley. He appointed a bipartisan commission that I chaired along with a Republican member, and we did work in 9 countries, in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Albania, and did some really fine work from 1990 to 95, made a lot of friends for the United States, did it on a bipartisan basis, and most of those countries are now our allies. They are our friends, and they want to help America. So you can do things on a bipartisan basis. We don't have very much of that anymore. We hope to see a time where that'll come back. Be glad, both of us will be glad to take questions. You're an attentive audience, and I have a feeling we'll get some tough ones. Okay. Go ahead. And I think she, yeah, okay.
You're going to take them, right?
So, they agree to take questions, you can direct them to both, to one, to either, that's all. But if you ask a question, you need to have it on the microphone, and we have a staff person right here, so go ahead and raise your hand. I saw the lady right here in red, let's start with her.
You were talking about the nonpartisan commissions for the redistricting. Today I heard that there's going to be a challenge now, that the Supreme Court is going to challenge that. Could you
Correct.
fill us in a little bit about that?
Well, there's a case on file challenging, I believe it's from the state of Florida, because Florida. Arizona. But there are people who don't like the idea that districts should be drawn on a nonpartisan or bipartisan basis. They want to go back to the old system. The legislature drew the districts, and the Supreme Court took jurisdiction of the case, and I assume they'll decide it this term. I hope that they don't say that these bipartisan commissions are illegal, that you can't do that, but that is a possibility. The Supreme Court may take that view. I think it'd be a very strange decision, strange result, but stranger things have happened.
It may come down to just the way Arizona, the legislature delegated the authority to this commission, but it would jeopardize California. Iowa is a little bit different. Florida, that he referred to, also had a referendum on redistricting. And that
Established
is-
standards.
Yeah, on standards, and that's been in court as well. Redistricting, no matter what, is always the most litigated piece because it's about political power.
Yeah.
Okay, I think
No, it's a good question, though. Good.
my microphone is working now. We have a question back there.
Yes. As we think about what is really good for the United States of America, the whole country, and this I think is a bipartisan subject too, what can be done to go back to before the Federal Reserve and eliminate the Federal Reserve and the IRS that are tied together and really cut down the federal expenses, the cost of running the government, and have a simple tax basis for running the government?
I'll let Tom start on that, but I have some opinions.
Well, you know, we actually had a bill up in the House to abolish the IRS code because whatever you think about the IRS and the need to get revenue, I don't think anybody thinks the IRS code is currently written is very good. It was written at different times and nothing closer to internal life than an IRS code provision once it gets in there and some special interest provision. I mean, the question is, well, what if we can't get a new one? We abolish this thing, we can't pass it, and how are we going to get it back? But look, that comes from the people. And right now you have members that they can't reach agreement on some of the simple things. This would be very, very complex because if you can't just abolish the IRS, somebody's going to have to collect revenue somewhere along the line. And I think the fear is, you're welcome to come back, I think the fear is we take this down, what can we reconstruct? Because it's very difficult for Congress to get even their appropriation bills done right now.
The last time we had a major revision of the tax code was in 1986, and I was in Congress at that time. That was before Tom was there. And it took 4 years, and it took a lot of bipartisan cooperation. What we did was to bring down the maximum rate. We collapsed some of the rates, tried to make it fairer, eliminated some of the deductions, and that's what people are looking at right now. The suggestion is that right now the maximum rate is 39.6 for individuals. It's 35 for corporations. The idea is maximum individual rate down to something below 30%, to bring the maximum corporate rate down from 35 to 28%, so that our corporations could have could compete better with their counterparts around the world. The problem with that, and it may happen, the problem is that every time you bring rates down, which we've done in the past, you have to eliminate a lot of things that are currently in the code. Some things in the code make sense. Some things don't make sense. If you were going to really lower the rates, you would have to look at the mortgage interest deduction. For a lot of people, that's the only tax deduction they have on their home. You'd have to change charitable deductions, perhaps, put a cap on that. A lot of people, this would affect hospitals, it would affect churches, it would affect educational institutions. This is not easy to do. I'm not suggesting that Congress won't make a sincere effort to try and get it done, and particularly on the corporate side, it would be nice if our corporations operated on a level playing field with corporations around the world. But even that is going to be easy, is not going to be easy to do. The alternative is to go to a flat tax, so some people have advocated. The problem with that is that that's very fine for people who make a lot of money. If the flat tax is low enough, it's not necessarily fair for people who, secretaries and for other people who are in support.
You wanted a
positions.
rejoinder, I think, though. Go ahead.
Yeah, just,
We can hear you.
okay, going back, I'm not talking about just tweaking the IRS code, but I mean going back and getting back to the Constitution of the United States, the Republic, before the Federal Reserve. If you want to know how fraudulent the Federal Reserve and IRS is, read the book, for example, Creature from Jekyll Island, and do a little research on the history of all of this. The federal government can run with a lot less dollars, and they've talked about a simplified, something that would be very simple to run, would be maybe a federal sales tax or something that would be simple to take care of.
And let's give other people a chance to
Yeah,
ask other
I just
questions.
make a couple quick comments. We did have a member come up with the flat tax, or a national sales tax, and they ran ads against him saying he was for a new tax, even though he was for abolishing the other taxes.
Yeah.
Any risks in this business? Now, you have members are very risk averse on these kind of issues, but I understand your point.
Yeah, take other questions, a wide range of subjects. Yeah, this fellow had
Right.
a question.
Okay, right here. Wait for the microphone if you don't mind.
You touched on this a little bit in your book, but political corruption, especially starting with Tom DeLay. What he did was not illegal, unethical, or immoral. What they did to him was extremely so. Just like the present administration, using the powers of the federal government and a number of their agencies, are hitting civic-minded groups all across this country. We are worried about this, and we are very angry that the staggering amount of laws and regulations needed to have our voices heard is inexcusable.
It's,
I'd like to have your
yeah,
comments.
it's interesting. We have a chapter in the book on this called The Big Punt, and what we said in the chapter is very interesting, is that Congress actually has abdicated its responsibility in some areas to the executive branch. Congress is the first article of the Constitution. Congress is the first branch, and Congress ought to be passing laws. And what happened with immigration, that's one example, Congress has dithered around on this subject for years and years and not done anything on immigration. So finally, the president took some executive, implemented an executive order, announced one, to make some changes in immigration. That's being challenged in court right now, and he may not prevail. But the reason we got to this point is that Congress itself basically abdicated its responsibility, and we're for Congress taking the initiative in a lot of areas, and so that the executive branch would not be able to just move in willy-nilly. And some of the things the executive branch has done were necessary. Some of them, a lot of them will be litigated, and we won't know until the court speaks. But Congress is basically at fault. If Congress had moved forward, the administration wouldn't have the leeway to do some of the things that it's done.
But to get to the delay issue, in Texas, you can talk at length about.
Yeah, I can explain delay.
What's happened in Texas, but prosecutors right now, the old saying in law school is that a prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich if that's what they want to do. A grand jury will do it. We just went through this in Virginia, where our governor was indicted and convicted. Now it is on appeal. And I think it has a reasonable chance of getting overturned on appeal, because the individual that gave the gifts are legal under Virginia law. Several former Democratic attorney generals in the state have signed an amicus brief in support of the governor. Basically, the argument was this guy got something for his gifts. The gifts are legal under Virginia law. What he took was probably, I think, didn't look very good, and I think it was bad judgment. And you can pass a law to abolish that. But the guy didn't get anything in return except a meeting with a cabinet official who basically said this guy's full of it. You don't do anything for him. And so, but you have prosecutors all the time that can take this and use it politically. And that is always, in danger. Texas has been an area where, with Kay Bailey Hutchinson, they indicted her at one point, if you remember, Martin. The current governor is under indictment there. Some of these are local indictments, some are federal. But control of the judiciary in the executive branch gives you carte blanche for stuff. And there are very few checks.
Yeah, let me, I'll just give you a brief, and I'll keep it brief, involving delay. Under Texas law, it's interesting, the laws differ from state to state. Everybody assumes that the campaign laws are the same in every state. They're not. Under Texas law, it's illegal for a corporation to contribute directly to a campaign. Now, some states permit corporate contributions. I think Virginia does, but Texas does not. And so what DeLay was charged with doing was taking corporate money, admittedly written by a corporation, sending it to Washington, to one of the political committees in Washington that he had great influence on. That committee then took the exact same amount of dollars. It had a soft money and a hard money account. Took that corporate money, put it in a soft money account, and then for the exact same dollar amount, wrote checks, individual money out of its soft money account to individual candidates in Texas. And the court said he was doing indirectly what you're not permitted under Texas law to do directly. Now, it went on and on. He was convicted. He was even sentenced. Ultimately, the court reversed it on a technicality. It's still on appeal. But it is illegal to make a corporate contribution to a political candidate in my state, and that's what he did. He kind of hid it by passing it through another committee, and that's what that was all about.
But
now,
you get it. You pick. Look, in Austin, if you get a Republican before a grand jury in Austin, it's probably over, just like in D.C. I mean, there's a lot of forum shopping in this.
We'll just leave that alone. That's the explanation of what he specifically did, and it was. And it was something that, on its face, appeared to violate the law.
And the jury found that way.
Yeah, the jury
That's why you
found
gotta
that. Let's take other questions.
So while we're waiting for another question, okay, we have one over there with the microphone. Gentlemen, I want to ask you, these people all came here tonight because obviously they're interested
Right.
in what you're selling. So what can they do? They're not members of Congress. What can they do as citizens who, I'm assuming every one of you goes to the polls? I would say that would be the first thing. But what can each one of them do to help you in your mission?
Tom?
Well, I always tell groups, just stand so everybody can see. The first thing is we all walk out with these I voted buttons on election day, and the election was over in the primary. I mean, how many of you voted in primaries? Primaries are generally low turnout affairs,
Yeah.
and people don't. The irony here is that the fastest growing registration group in the country are independents or declined estates. The difficulty is these districts get so jury-rigged that the elections doesn't make any difference in November because it's all decided in the primaries. And independents generally don't participate in that process. That's the difficulty. But the more and more voters are upset with the way things are going and are leaving both parties, which are losing market share. I'd just add one other thing. On residential sorting, of the 50 states in the last presidential election, only 4 states was the presidential race within 5 percentage points. So even there, because of residential sorting patterns, you're not getting that many states that are really in contention at this point. The presidential race was 8 or 9 states. So what does your vote mean under those circumstances? And I just points back to primaries, and in California, you have 2 Democrats in a runoff. Republican votes all of a sudden matter. Now it plays havoc with a 2-party system. It has some pluses and some minuses, but I think it's a very interesting laboratory experiment.
I'll be specific. If you think, if those of you who, of course, you're here and you've been exposed to, I assume everybody's from California here. Maybe we have some tourists, I don't know, from other states. But okay, but if those of you who are from California, if you think the California system makes sense, you ought to state that. You ought to write letters to the editor. You ought to tell your friends in other states. If you don't think it makes sense, then you ought to express that view too. I mean, legislatures respond to their constituents. And you ought to make your views known. If you think the campaign finance system is wrong and you think there ought to be full disclosure, then you ought to contact your United States senators and your congressmen and say, pass a law, Congress, to make these groups disclose all their expenditures, all their contributions. You've got a right as a citizen to petition your government And I will tell you that as a member of Congress, this was before we had, I've been out for 10 years. It was before you'd have all these talk show hosts saying, you know, email your congressman, burn up the phones. Congressmen do listen to what their constituents have to say. I did town hall meetings. I spoke to Tom makes a joke that in his district people said that he would come to everything, including the opening of an envelope. He went to events all through his district, and I did too. And members of Congress generally like their job, and they generally are honest. That doesn't mean that they're always right in terms of their votes, but they have to listen to the people who elected them. And you have a right to, if your congressman is having a town hall meeting, if he's going to speak to the Rotary Club, or if he's going to speak to a church organization you belong to, show up and make your opinions known. Don't be passive. And you can make a difference. And it may be that some of you want to apply to be on the redistricting commission next time around. I don't know if you want to do that, but you have that right in California now. It's citizens who get selected. There are a lot of things you can do, and the main thing is to let your senators and your congressmen know that you're paying attention to what they're doing and the votes they're casting. You have much more information at your fingertips than people used to have. When I was first elected, seems like the Stone Age almost. I was elected in 1978. You didn't have televised proceedings in the House. The TV cameras went on in March of '79 after I became a congressman. You didn't have any all-news television stations. CNN went on the air in 1980. And you didn't have the internet until sometime late in the 1980s. And so people have, Tom likes to point out that there's an awful lot of stuff that's not true on the internet. We all understand that. But if you really want to find out what's going on in Washington, you can find out now. And I have some very Republican relatives in Texas who would send me emails, and they say, Martin, you see this, I want you to look at this terrible thing that I saw on the internet about Congress. And so I would patiently respond to them and point out what in that was true and what was not true. A lot of information on the internet is not true because you don't have editors, you don't have people to sort through it. But you have information at your fingertips, use it, and make your views known.
Great. Okay, I think we had a question over on that side.
Thank you for your optimism that things can change. It seems like cooperation and collaboration is a good thing, but we're not getting it. What do you see for our next generation, our kids and our kids' kids, if we continue doing what we're doing today?
Tom? It's a good question.
Well, I mean, we have right now, just in my opinion, fiscally we're on an unsustainable path. And we're an airplane flying into the mountain, and sooner or later you hit the mountain. I mean, the difficulty today is members who get out in front of this, there's always some group think it's not a problem. You know, that there's always some deniers on everything, and you wait until there's a crisis. The good news in America is when there's a crisis, we do act. TARP, I don't want to get into an argument on it, but it was a tough, nasty vote for everybody, but Congress did act and got together at that point. 9/11, we'd been quarreling. Congress did get together all of a sudden and got together on those issues. So when there's a crisis, Congress gets together. Absent a crisis, though, all of the metrics and the incentives are just stay away from it because members tend to be risk averse at this point and the party's so divided.
You know, what's going on right now is very interesting, and I hope young people are paying attention. Congress has decided, the President has asked Congress to vote on the issue of authorizing military force, I'm not sure how it's going to be defined, against ISIS in the Middle East. And this is going to be a real debate in Congress. And there are people on both sides of the aisle who are for it, and there are people on both sides of the aisle who are against it. And I would hope that young people will follow that closely, because this is one of the few times where Congress is actually going to have a really public debate on a very important subject. They'll reach a result. I'm not sure how the vote's going to turn out, but there are moments in our history where there are some extraordinary things that are about to take place, and this is one of them. I was in Congress for both of the votes on authorizing troops against Iraq. When George H.W. Bush, right before, it was way before 9/11, George H.W. Bush, when Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait, asked for Congress to vote to authorize the United States to take military action against Iraq. I voted for it. The majority of the people in my own party, Democratic Party, voted no. I was in the minority in my own party. Then George W. Bush came before us after 9/11 and asked for the authorization to send troops against Saddam Hussein. Probably the worst single vote I have cast the entire time I was in Congress. I voted for that also, but I didn't ask enough tough questions. Members of Congress had the right to go in and look at intelligence information. We have intelligence committees. The information is kept under lock and key, but a member of Congress can go in and read the classified information at any point. Very few members actually did that. It turned out after the fact that there was very significant disagreement within our own intelligence community about whether there had been weapons of mass destruction. I wish I had been more diligent. The right vote on that one was no. We do have some very interesting topics we have to vote on from time to time, and they are very important to young people because it's young people. Not everybody is subject to serving in our military these days. We don't have a draft, but a lot of young people, of course, do volunteer for our armed services, and a lot of parents are very concerned, and grandparents, I'm a grandparent, about what's going to happen with our young people, how they're going to be used militarily. And we face enormous problems as a country. It used to be that there was a statement, a position, that politics stopped at the water's edge, and that you didn't have a Democratic view on foreign policy or a Republican view on foreign policy. That's not true anymore. And we don't just tell the president, do whatever you want to in terms of committing American troops. We hope that whoever's president, whether he's a Democrat or Republican, will be wise in how he uses American force. But these are, I would hope that young people would be paying particular attention to what's going on right now at Congress on this issue.
Okay, we have time for just a couple more questions. This gentleman right here in the second row, right on the end there.
This country was founded on the principle of division of powers. Now, but what's been happening over a period of time, the executive branch is becoming more dominant all the time. And the other interest, and so we're seeing things like executive action and things like that. But at the same time, our present president not so long ago announced that he did not have a policy when it comes to ISIS and when it comes to terrorists. But yet, at the same time, he has the power to do a lot of these things. Now, what I'm hearing is what we need to do is kind of get some of this power back to Congress and away from the presidency that it has been in the direction it has been moving. And the other thing, I think, we talked about the division of powers here a second ago, and the most powerful thing that's been happening is the power of TV. In 1977, a Canadian named Marshall McLuhan predicted that eventually whoever could show best on TV would become president of the United States. He said it past did not matter, his history would not matter, his capabilities would not matter. All that would matter is his presentation. So I'm hearing that we talk about us changing things when we're not able to change it without the power of TV. I'd like some comment on that.
Well, first of all, I'd include the internet now because the internet's a very powerful tool, and most people get their information not from TV or newspapers, but from the internet. And I don't think McLuhan at the University of Toronto in the 70s even figured that would come in. But you make a very good point addressing congressional power versus the executive branch just usurping power. Congress is at fault in this by giving up the ability to designate specific projects and turning that over to the president. In other words, giving up earmarking. Somebody earmarks it. Now the president earmarks it. You know, if you like Cylinder, I just say to Boehner, John, you're letting him do, you don't want to do it, so he does Cylinder, and then you complain. This is a congressional prerogative for the first 150 years of the Republic. Congress earmarked almost everything. On the war powers, they should have been up on this thing right away. Congress has been reluctant to take this up, saying, you go ahead and do it. What's happened, though, The president's party in Congress today is, when I talk about a parliamentary behavior, they act like it's a parliamentary system. They stand behind their president. They don't stand for Congress as an institution. And the end result of that is that the president's party in Congress, if they're the majority, they fall in line. They don't stand up for congressional priorities. They stand up for presidential priorities. If they're the minority party in Congress and the presidents, they stand up and filibuster to protect their president because they feel their destinies are intertwined. And the end result has been the president ends up usurping the power and filling that vacuum. I think it's a terrible thing. I'm an institutionalist. I did investigations as a Republican committee chairman of the Bush White House on Abramoff. People had to resign. We caught them taking free tickets. I wrote the committee report on Katrina, where they were at fault. And Carl Rose called up saying, "What do you do?" I said, "Carl, this is my job. I'm an institutionalist. You know, Congress has a role in this thing, and it's not about you or them. It's just about we have a balance of powers, and Congress has been punting on this, and our chapter, The Big Punt, I think, points a lot of that out." Martin?
I don't know that there's too much to add. It is interesting. I speak to high school kids a lot, middle school kids, some college kids, and I point out the irony of our system. And we are, of course, the oldest continuous democracy right now. Of all the democracies that exist right now, we've been in existence longer than any of the others. We were a country founded in a revolution, and yet the revolutionaries created a very conservative form of government. It's hard to get anything done in under our government. Bill has to pass the House, it has to pass the Senate, it has to go to a conference committee, it has to come back, be voted on again by both chambers, then it goes to the president, he can sign it or veto it. If he vetoes it, it comes back and it takes 2/3 of Congress, of both houses, to override the veto. We have a country, a form of government where it is hard to change things. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying if a problem is big enough. We shouldn't just throw up our hands and say, gee, we just can't get any of this done. I was in Congress when the last time we changed the immigration laws in 1986. I was in Congress in 1983 when we reformed Social Security. Social Security was about to go broke. And President Reagan appointed a bipartisan commission. Tough Democrats, tough Republicans got in a room and figured out how to keep Social Security solvent for a very long period of time. Now, it may have another problem in the future, but we were able to face up to that because we looked at each other and said, this is something that, I don't care how hard it is to do, it's something we have to do for the country. Somehow, the question was asked earlier, what can citizens do? The citizens can urge their members of Congress to take hard votes, to make hard decisions, not just to do the easy things. Because our government is set up, as I said, where it's very hard to get things done, but we have to do some things from time to time. We may have a situation again where Social Security could be back in the soup here. Medicare may well be pretty soon. And we're going to have to Congress is going to have to make some decisions to keep those programs strong because they are so important to seniors, and so the senior population is increasing as a percentage of our total population. We're going to have some serious problems making sure that those promises are fulfilled. What I'm saying is, tell your members of Congress not to just take the easy way out. Tell them to solve some of these problems, and don't just pass the buck to the administration.
Okay, we have time for one more question. This gentleman right here in the middle. Wait for the microphone if you don't mind.
They're streaming.
What do you think can realistically be done to reduce the amount of fraud in entitlements? But it's my opinion that it's a very small minority of recipients in certain areas are actually should be getting it, and like in disabilities. I'm not saying I think what's happened is those who really deserve it are being lumped in with a lot of the deadbeats. Is there anything that can be done?
I have some thoughts on that, and I'll be glad to try.
Go ahead, and I'll follow up.
Right out of law school, I went to Georgetown Law School, and I went back to Texas where I'd grown up, and I clerked for a federal judge, Sarah Hughes, a very famous federal judge. She was the one who swore in Lyndon Johnson after the Kennedy assassination. If you see the pictures in the history book, there's this little short woman, about 5 feet tall, and there's this hulking president holding up his hand like that. The picture is shot from behind her, and you just see her, the top of her head, and Lyndon Johnson taking the oath of office. Now, what a Judge Hughes was a very tough the Democratic appointee, was a very tough law and order judge. And when she would have white-collar criminals, and I'm going to answer this question in a minute, but when she would have white-collar criminals come in and who had defrauded people, and they'd come and they'd plead before her, and they'd say, "Oh, I've got a family, and I've never been in trouble before, and okay, and I'll never do this again." She sent them to jail, maybe for a year or two, but she sent a message out to other people who might be considering doing the same thing, that if you do it, you're going to get some jail time. The answer is the same. If to the extent there is welfare fraud of any kind, people break the law, they ought to pay a penalty. That's all. It's as simple.
There's the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, is an arm of Congress, is guesstimated there are more than $100 billion annually in improper payments. That's not all fraud, but they're not appropriately documented and the like. My experience, and I was a county executive before I came to Congress, is that it's hard to get agencies to act to take out fraud in their agencies with their recipients, because they don't keep the money. Money just goes somewhere else. It's got to be driven from the top. But today we have enough data analytics and so on that if it is driven from the top, we can go in and recover a lot of that. And the GAO puts this on their watch list every year, saying there's just tons of improper payments coming out and a lot of fraud, and it just piles up the debt. And I think it's a serious problem.
I'll give you another example. When as a member of Congress, I had a woman that I'd gone to high school with in Fort Worth, Texas, and she was married to a psychiatrist, a well-regarded physician in Fort Worth, Texas. And it seemed that he got involved in Medicare and Medicaid fraud. And my high school classmate came to me and said, "Martin, can't you get my husband a suspended sentence? Can't we prevent him from going to jail?" And I said, I don't even remember her name, but I said to her, as a congressman, I'm not going to intervene in the judicial process. He was convicted of Medicare fraud. He may not go to jail for very long, but he's going to do some time. I mean, that's the way our system ought to operate, quite frankly. And she was not happy with the answer I gave her. But I said, I'm not going to get in the middle of this. I'm not going to go ask a judge to let him have probation, to let him be out on the street. There was another congressman, a friend of mine from California, Tony Coelho. I don't know if you remember. He's been out of Congress a long time. Right. Yeah, and he wrote a letter, if I remember correctly, for someone who committed a violent crime, and that person, to try to help that person get a suspended sentence. And the person then committed another crime while he was out. And it almost sunk Tony. He still managed to get reelected, but it was not a good thing for him to have done. And so members of Congress have to be very careful and not interject themselves in the middle of the judicial system.
But this can be driven by, we know there's fraud. There's enough data analytics. Yeah. If you make this a reason to go after it, I think we could do a much better job in that area. Anyway, I hope you'll take a look at the book. We tried to write this in a way for the person who watches C-SPAN, who's involved, to try to understand how this has come about. This didn't just come about by happenstance. So these macro factors that have emerged are causing people to behave in a certain way. I think, Martin, I would say we have some really good members on both the Republican and Democrat. Really smart, good members. But the forces on them just to get reelected really don't allow them to be themselves and exercise their best judgment. And so understanding that, I think, opens people's eyes into what the system is and what you can do, and we recommend it. But we really appreciate everybody coming out.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I thought that was refreshing. I'm thrilled that all of you showed up. They have agreed to sign books, and we'll even personalize them. So if you give us 1 minute, the line will start right here, okay? If you don't have a book, you can get one right around the corner there. They'll answer questions, they'll take photographs, a very amenable set of authors we have here, so take advantage of that. If you thought of another question in the meantime, let's go ahead and get settled over here. Thank you all for coming. You know we have lots of great programs like this all the time. Please keep in touch with us. We'll keep in touch with you. And thank you for coming. If you have never been here before and you didn't get a chance to go through the museum, I hope you'll be back soon so that you can see all of the great things that we do here. Thank you.